And I'd like to officially welcome everybody to the meeting today. I can go ahead and see already that Stephen is starting to put the things into chat, some resources that we like to put in there for every meeting. So please do frequent the chat. You could type your questions in the chat as well, or if you would like to unmute yourself and ask the questions, please do feel free to do that. Today's topic is a really interesting topic that a lot of people are not really aware of. We're going to be talking today about a camera, that you can have a camera in your room. Did you know that you can actually have a camera in your room if you live in a long-term care facility? There's some caveats to that. And so we've invited Lawrence Wagner, who is the regional ombudsman for suburban Cook County, to talk with us about this today. Lawrence has shared this conversation with us in the past, and we felt it was about time that we revisited, particularly as COVID is coming to an end, so that people can feel comfortable in making sure that they can continue to see their loved ones in a manner through this electronic devices that we're all getting more and more used to as we've kind of survived COVID. Lawrence, if you want to go ahead, if you want to start sharing your screen.
Okay. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen here.
Yep, you want to make sure you do that. Okay, Lawrence, if you want to go ahead and take it, please feel free. We'd like to hear more about this.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And as Lee said, we will be talking about electronic monitoring in long-term care facilities. I'm sorry, there's a weird bar here at the bottom of my screen. Okay, so there's an actual law in the state of Illinois, and also it's there on your screen, 210 ILCS 32.1, also known as Public Act 99-430. So this became effective January of 2016, and in essence, it allows there to be electronic monitoring in rooms at certain long-term care facilities.
And I want you to know, we've gone ahead and some of our work group members already dropped this link into the chat. So if anybody would like to access the reg, they can click on the link in the chat as well.
Right, and this is something that predates myself and certainly some of us, but apparently it's an act that the Attorney General's office worked closely with residents and resident advocates to get this done. And you know, for those of you who are in long-term care facilities or have loved ones in those facilities can see what the value of this is. It allows you to basically keep an eye on yourself or your loved one while you're in the facility, so that we can basically see what kind of things are going on in the room. A lot of times we have facility staff members that will do things and will deny having done it. If you have a camera in the room and you can monitor it from a distance, you can have that really as a record for what kinds of activities goes on in your loved one's room. And you know, when the facility tries to deny it, you can pull out the tape and say, hey, look, this is what we know happened. And you can challenge them with it that way. So
Yeah,
what exactly does the act say?
And I was around when this act first came into play, and I remember there was a lot of conversation about this and what exactly it would look like, because it seemed like it'd be a very complicated thing, you know, to be respectful of everybody who lived in the long-term care facility. So I think the law goes into that a little bit more, doesn't it? The act, it talks about this stuff.
Right, and it's not complicated at all. I mean, it's really simple, and hopefully that'll become clear from my this is not going to be a very lengthy presentation, but hopefully from the presentation you'll see it's not a complicated matter. I mean, basically, if the resident wants the camera, or if the resident's authorized representative wants the camera, it's just a matter of, if the resident has a roommate, getting the roommate to sign a consent form and submitting it to the facility. And it's not a request to the facility. We need to make that clear. You're not asking the facility to do it. You have, as a resident, you have an absolute right to have that in your room. You're just notifying the facility, because as we'll get to in a later slide, the facility does have a little bit of responsibility here, but they can't deny the camera in the room.
So I want to make sure everybody really hears that, Lawrence, because I think that's a really important thing to really drive home, is that anybody can do this. We don't have to ask the nursing home for permission to be able to have a camera in my room or a camera in my loved one's room.
No, not at
great.
all. And I know some facilities try to make it seem like you need their consent, but you don't. And you know, one of the things that I always say to facilities when they assert a position, I always say to them, show me where it says that in the law. Show me where it says that in the regulations. So, and they won't be able to, because it doesn't exist. Because the ultimate purpose of allowing electronic monitoring in rooms is just to make sure the residents are being treated well, that they're getting the best care possible, they're being treated with dignity, and you know, they're not suffering any ill treatment at the hands of facility staff.
And I'm also feeling, as a family member, if my mother was a frequent faller, for example, and we couldn't figure out why she was falling and what was going on, I would even be able to see that on a monitor, be able to see, you know, she seems to do it every day at like 10 p.m. and it looks like she's trying to get up to go to the washroom.
Right.
And
absolutely.
Got somebody to toilet her before then,
right.
We would avoid the fall.
And certainly if you have a loved one who's non-communicative, it certainly helps, because when they can't express to you what's going on in their day-to-day care, then you're able to see it for yourself. So, you know, it gives you, you know, it can be a useful tool. Even, and I'm speaking as a resident advocate here, so take this with a bit of a grain of salt. I think it can be a useful tool even for facilities, because, you know, the administrator, whoever else, can see, you know, exactly what's going on in the room. You know, if we let them see, they don't have to have access to it, but they can see what's going on in the room, so they can improve upon the care that they're providing for residents, you know, which is something they claim they want to do, right? So, you know, we're giving them here a tool and an opportunity to have a first-hand insight to what's going on, so they can make adjustments where they feel is necessary.
Okay.
So the act itself, it allows for electronic monitoring in the residence room. It also sets rights and responsibilities for residents and facilities regarding electronic monitoring. And it says that the monitoring can be audio or video. It can be recorded. The only thing is the device cannot take still photographs. So that's the one, if you will, one exception to it being able to record what's going on in the room. I'm not sure why they made that carve out, because in my opinion, a video would be much more helpful than a still photograph. But that's a carve out that the law made, and it's there. Just know that your device is not allowed, should not be able to, or should not take still photograph while it's functioning in the room. So which facilities are covered by the Act? And pretty much any long-term care facility is covered. But specifically, the Act makes mention of IDDD care acts that has 30 or more beds, any facility licensed under the MCDD Act, and really any long-term care facility licensed under the Nursing Home Care Act, or any facility that provides housing to individuals with dementia. And there are other facilities that may not be captured here, but those are covered by another act. Those are covered by 210 ILCS 165. It's a pretty long title to it, but basically it covers any of the other facilities, and it provides the same rights and privileges that the Electronic Monitoring Act that we're talking about right here talks about. So, you know, bottom line is, if you or your loved one live in some kind of long-term care facility in Illinois, you are under the law. You under the law have the right to have electronic monitoring in your room.
So I think that that's another important thing just to stress too. This is Illinois specific. So this is not a federal law. This is an Illinois law. So if you have a loved one who might live in Wisconsin or Indiana, this is not applicable to them. Just remember that. So
at the risk of contradicting myself, there are some facilities that are not specifically covered by the Act. You can see them on the screen, but in my opinion, these types of facilities are, you know, the folks who reside in these facilities, especially supportive living and assisted living, they are more functional, and I don't want to use that word, but I'll use that word. So they almost live in private apartment type settings, and usually in that setting, there are less restrictions to begin with, and I don't think you would necessarily need a law to authorize you to have electronic monitoring in your space. That's treated more as like a private residence than, say, a nursing home would be treated. So you have more freedom to do things in there, and the rules around there tend to be related more to modifying the space. So if you put a camera up, and just to make sure that if you attach it to the wall, when you move out, you have to fix, plug the holes in the wall, that kind of thing. So what you're looking at there is really not a need to have a law give you authority to do it, because that's more of a private residence and you already inherently have that right anyway.
Cool.
So when if a resident or a residence authorized representative decide they want to have a camera in the room, the law gives them the right just to buy and use that camera, again, to record audio, record video, but no pictures. And the act refers to a consent form, and I don't like the way the act refers to it, because it's a, I don't know, do we have a link to it? Stephen, I'll put you, I'll call you out on this one. The form is kind of cumbersome because it's an 8-page form, and really only the first 2 pages are relevant to the resident whose room is actually going, who is actually requesting it. The other pages tend to be more for if the resident has a roommate. Because if you have a roommate, and I think we'll get to this in another slide, if the resident has a roommate, then you have to have the roommate's consent to have electronic monitoring in the room. And that makes sense, because the camera will necessarily capture things that involve the roommate as well. Certainly the audio piece of it, and depending on how the room is situated, the video piece of it may not, but certainly the audio piece of it. So the roommate needs to complete the consent form to get it. And again, the other problem I have with them referring to it as a consent form is because, again, it gives the impression, at least to the facilities, that the resident is requesting consent to have electronic monitoring in the room, when that's not the case, because they don't need the facility's consent. This is a form by which the resident tells the facility that they want electronic monitoring in their room. Now, because it's written that way, we'll talk about the idea of consent. So if the resident is aware, can give direction or what have you, they don't need anyone's consent to have a camera. Now, the idea of consent does come into play, though, where a resident cannot give direction, when a resident is not aware of, when I shouldn't say aware, doesn't have the capacity. That's the word I'm looking for. When a resident doesn't have the capacity to say that they themselves personally want a camera, and that's when the idea of consent comes in, because then either the resident's guardian or agent on the power of attorney or someone else would then have to get some kind of consent to get the camera in the room. And again, this when you're dealing with a resident who doesn't, if you're dealing with a resident who doesn't have a guardian, or who also lacks the ability to fully understand what's going on with the electronic monitoring, then we're looking at having to get the sign off from a physician. And again, we're not looking for consent necessarily from the physician. The physician is only saying that they have made a determination that this resident lacks the capacity to give consent to the camera. And then at that point, then the guardian or someone else in authority in that person, in that resident's life, can give consent to having the camera in the room. And that can be, like with almost anything else for healthcare, that could be a spouse, an adult child, a sibling, a parent, and even if you don't have, someone who's a formal guardian or a formal agent under a power of attorney, those the folks who can otherwise be surrogate decision makers for a resident can give consent to having electronic monitoring in the room.
So this piece about a physician must determine that piece. I don't know if you want to go back, determine the residents, that the resident can't understand the implications. Is physician defined? I'm just, curiosity, because I know when we talked about this in our work group conversations, we talked about this, that sometimes might enable to feel like a barrier for people, because if the facility physician is driving that? Can it be any physician? Does it have to be, I guess, is it defined? Is it clear?
The act does not define it, so it can be any physician. And the thing about it is, this is not, in my opinion, again, this is not an area in which the facility wants to play games, because, that piece of it only comes into play if there's a determination that the resident cannot themselves give consent. And I'm trying to think of a better word than consent, because I don't want to keep using the word consent, because a resident who can give direction can ask for a camera without anyone's permission.
Mm-hmm.
So the way the act is written, either the resident has capacity to do it by themselves, or they need to get an authorized person to sign off. And it's in a situation where the resident doesn't have capacity themselves that you need a physician to say that that resident doesn't have capacity. And then you can go to the authority of the guardian or the agent on the power of attorney or a surrogate decision maker. So if the facility wants to play games with the physician saying that they don't have capacity, that's great. Then the resident can just say on their own, I'll do it. Of course, that becomes problematic if the resident truly doesn't have capacity, because then no one is given consent.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be any physician. The act does not specify that it has to be the facility physician or that it has to be some other particular physician. I think any physician who has treated the resident can give that opinion in this context.
So if I was taking my mother out to the doctor, I could bring this form along, and if my mother was not able to give, and we're not going to use the word consent, because even though it's written in the guidance,
Right.
one of the participants also put that in, and my chat has disappeared on me. Use the word capacity. There we go, Joyce. Capacity. Even though consent is written in the law, capacity is a better way to view it when we're looking at this rule here, this law.
Right.
Wonderful. Okay.
So again, it brings us to the point where consent is actually required, which is when the resident has a roommate, and the roommate must give a written consent to having the camera in the room. And then again, that has to happen before the camera is put in place. The form has to be filled out and has to be submitted to the facility, showing that the resident gives his or her consent to having the camera in the room.
And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, we don't want to interfere in someone else's privacy issues. So this makes perfect sense inside the law.
Right. And just as the roommate has to give consent, the roommate can withdraw that consent at any point. And the roommate can also place conditions around when and how the camera can be used. So, if you have a roommate, and unfortunately, fortunately, it's not just a blanket use of the camera. Now, obviously, if you're in a room by yourself, then you can use that camera however you want, whenever you want. But with the roommate present, you need to get the roommate's consent to use the camera in particular ways. And again, the law itself kind of lays out some potential restrictions that a roommate can have on the use of a camera. And it also shows up in the consent form. And if to kind of give the resident's roommate a heads up on the kinds of ways they can limit it, because there may be some roommates who might just have a knee-jerk reaction and go, no, I don't want this. I don't want my business out there. It's an invasion of my privacy. But then if you introduce them to the idea that it's not just a blanket usage, that you can limit the way it's used because you're present in the room as well, that can soften their position a little bit and then bring them to the point of consenting to having the camera.
Yeah, and I was going to add, like, there's a lot of ways that you can block off half the room on cameras, whether it's how the camera is positioned in the room, or I know some cameras will have a kind of a privacy block where you can actually block out certain sections. I've got security cameras on my house, and one of them it catches my neighbor's window, And right in that section, I've got a big block where it will not record anything. And it's just built into the software. So, there's lots of things to consider when discussing with a roommate how how they want it set up.
Very
Thanks,
interesting.
Stephen.
I didn't know it could do that, Stephen. Thank you for that information.
Technology is great. There's a lot you can do with technology these days.
Yeah.
I'm finding out new things every day myself. So if the roommate doesn't give consent, the facility must try to accommodate the monitoring. And the act lays out these two ways: either move the resident to another shared room, the resident who wants the monitoring, move them to another shared room, providing those new roommates will consent to it, or moving the requester to a private room. Of course, if that happens, you must pay the private room rate. And it's a thing, is the requirement is for the facility to keep revisiting this every 2 weeks until they're able to accommodate the request. This is how much of a right the resident has to having a camera if they want one. So the facility just can't go, oh, roommate doesn't consent, sorry, you can't have it. They have to try to accommodate it, and they have to make this attempt every 2 weeks until they can accommodate it.
That's a really important piece of that.
It is.
This rule. That's really, I think, important for everyone to remember too. So, because sometimes it does feel like things can move at a snail's pace when we're trying to do something like this, and this keeps it on the radar so that it has to keep happening. So it's a really important piece.
Right. And to strengthen this just a little bit more, the act requires every facility to report to IDPH how many requests they get for electronic monitoring. And I forget what the frequency of reporting is, but they need to report that to IDPH. So I'm guessing IDPH uses that data to make sure the facility is finding accommodations where they need so. I don't want to speak for IDPH, but that would seem to make sense to me.
Mm.
I have can we ask a quick question, or should I type it in the meeting?
Nope, you can ask it, Destiny. Go ahead.
When it says must pay private rate, I don't know if he just provides the answer to that. Is that the individual must pay the private rate, or the facility must pay the difference?
The individual. So typically, our residents are on Medicaid, and they pay the Medicaid rate, which is why they're in. Which is why they have roommates. Medicaid, as we know, Medicaid doesn't pay for private rooms because private rooms tend to be more expensive. So if the resident can, or at least probably not the resident, but the resident's family can pay the difference between the Medicaid rate and the private room rate, then they can do that, put the resident in a private room, and then have the electronic monitoring that way.
And
okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it's make that clear that they don't have to do the private room rate. They could just move to another room, but they'd have to get their roommates to agree to their new roommate would need to consent that the camera was okay. So that's it's not like that's the only other way you could do it, is to have to pay more money to live in a private room. You could also do that first bullet point, which is moving yourself, but that wants the camera into another room that's a shared room that the roommates agreed to have.
Okay, thank you.
There was another question that also popped up, Lawrence. What happens when the guardian wants the camera, but the resident doesn't?
Well, that's a good question. I think that will likely be resolved in favor of the guardian, because typically when you're at the if you have a plenary guardian, which is a full guardianship of the person and the person's property, then our decision making tend to default to the guardian and not to the resident. Now, as ombudsman, we don't see it that way, because we still think if a resident has capacity to make decisions on a certain level, then we take direction from the residents. But the rest of the world doesn't operate that way. And certainly in that case, I believe that the facility would take the guardian's direction and put a camera in the room.
So I think that there's also, we just want to make sure that people understand the guardian. That guardian is not necessarily a power of attorney or a representative. A guardian is that legal It's a
Right.
legal thing that happened that someone else is making the decisions for the individual. And
Right.
that's a whole other conversation. And we have actually, if this is confusing to you, we have done other resident family support council meetings on what a guardian actually is. And you can go to YouTube and you can pick those up to really understand the difference between what a guardian is, a power of attorney is, and even when the resident has nobody designated as a representative to help them.
Right. If the resident has a guardian, that means a court somewhere has determined that the resident is not capable of making decisions for themselves. The court has determined that the individual has no capacity. But again, this is not a conversation about guardianship, but at the same time, there can be various degrees, if you will, of guardianship. There could be, just a general plenary guardianship where the court says, okay, resident, you have no rights whatsoever. The guardian will make all decisions for you. And then there are different levels of it beneath that where the guardian might only be appointed to make certain types of decisions or making decisions in concert with the resident. But it all depends on what the court order is based on. If they do it right, it's based on, full medical files, doctor's opinions about the person's capacity, and on and on and on.
And I think it's also important to note that if you are the resident and your guardian is wanting to put the camera in and you don't want the camera, that you can call your ombudsman and they can help walk you through this as well and help become your voice. Because as ombudsman, we are that one entity that really does listen to what the individual wants. The resident is the client always. And that's who we work for advocating. So if you're a resident and someone's trying to put a camera in your room and you don't want that camera, you can call your ombudsman, and that contact information is one of the first pieces of information that we'll put in today's chat that was put in by Stephen. Okay.
Thanks, Lee. Types of monitoring devices, again, video and audio recording or streaming devices. Some people don't necessarily want to record. They just want to make sure they can see what's going on in the room, which, that's an option for them as well. The Act does require that the facility cooperate with you, regardless of what type of monitoring device you choose. The facility has to cooperate with this installation. And I don't recall it. I think I deal with this on a subsequent slide, but I'll talk about it now. So if you need access, let's just say you're like Stephen and you have a fancy, robust system that monitors and can block out here and there. And because it's so robust, you need access to the facilities, technology room, or what have you. They have to give you that access. They can't say, well, no, we're not going to give you access to our room because, it's our room. They have to give access to it. They have to, now, if they don't have to provide you with the Wi-Fi if you need Wi-Fi, but they have to give you access to the infrastructure to allow you to connect your system and get it operational. So, the good news to that, though, is you don't need to have a big, robust system to get this done. You simply buy, if you will, a nanny cam. If we're all familiar with that term, it's a little camera, stick it in a spot in the room, and it doesn't even have to be Wi-Fi enabled. But if it's Wi-Fi enabled, then you can get, hopefully get a little hotspot and get service that way. But it doesn't have to be an expensive or a very involved procedure at all. So, I wanted to bring that out because some facilities use that as an excuse again for not wanting to do this. They're like, oh, well, it'll be too involved in too much technology and Wi-Fi and what have you. And while that is not an excuse or even a good reason for them to deny it, it's not even necessary because you can have some lower tech solutions to this and getting monitoring devices in, and it'll accomplish the same purpose.
Can you use like an Alexa device where it wouldn't be on all the time? Just if I at home said I want to call my mother and do a video monitoring conversation with her, can you do that? Would that fall underneath this rule as well?
I would say yes.
So that's another idea that people might not always want to have a camera on, but they may want to be able to do video conversations via a device like an Alexa. And that might be another way of being able to keep eyes on people that particularly if you live out of town or if you're someone who visits your loved one every day and you go on vacation, you may be able to continue to see that individual on that ongoing basis, which could be
Right,
another.
and we had some residents and their loved ones do that, particularly during COVID.
Mhm.
You know, and the facilities were a little bit less resistant to it because of COVID. But now that we are, according to the powers that be, were coming out of COVID, you know, we might start seeing some more resistance to that now. But the thing about it is, once, you know, it's like a government right? Once you get it, they can't take it away. So what, if anything, the experience during COVID can prove to the facilities that there's no need for you to resist this. It's a good idea, and it's one that can be easily implemented with little or no involvement on the facility's part.
There was another question that came up. What happens if your resident is currently alone in a shared room and then a roommate moves in and doesn't consent to the camera already in the room?
If the roommate coming in doesn't consent, then the camera has to go, or the camera has to go, and then the facility has to try to accommodate, as we discussed a couple slides ago.
Got it. Yeah, and then there also was just some concerns about the problem with HIPAA in the roommate, if there's any HIPAA concerns in regards to the roommate. And I think that's what the consent
Right.
would basically be, voiding that piece so that the roommate is saying it's okay that they're hearing me, or that they're
Right,
seeing.
and the roommate can make as a condition, you can't have the recording going on while I'm getting treatment. That can be a condition
Mm-hmm.
in the consent form. So hopefully that would cover the HIPAA concerns.
Got it. And there's also, would we have to use that consent form for Alexa as well? If we had Alexa in the room, I would believe we would, because
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're just doing, and I don't know if this example is kind of what you're talking about. If I'm just doing FaceTime, let's say I want to FaceTime my loved one. I don't think you should need a consent form from the roommate to do that, because it's not something that's on constantly. It's just, you know, you're just having a video conversation with your loved one, which will have a timestamp on it and be a certain duration. And when you're done with your conversation, it gets turned off and everyone goes about their merry way. So you don't, in my opinion, you would not need a consent form for that.
So that would be the same thing with an Alexa, because you have to answer the Alexa in order
Correct.
for it to happen.
Right.
So, okay.
And I would argue that if it's a device where you can just pop in and talk, because some of those you can just pop in and talk to the person, that you would probably need the consent form. And also it might depend on which way that device is facing. So, you know, at the very least, having the conversation with the roommate
Absolutely
is important. Whether or not a consent form is required, you still need to have the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's just being a good roommate, right? You know, whenever you
Right.
something, you know,
Being
something's going
kind.
to happen in a room that can potentially impact your roommate, whether it's electronic device or something else. As a good roommate, you want to have that conversation. So.
Yeah, and there is that piece though that Alexa is always listening. So this might be worth some probing.
Well, your cell phone is always listening, Lee.
Yeah.
So.
Last night she was talking while my husband and I were watching TV, and we had no idea why she was talking to us. But that might be something I will explore this further, Amy, with Illinois Department of Public Health, and see what they will say. Because when this was written, there was no such thing as Alexa. So it's changed since then. So I'll go ahead and I will get further information about that and make sure that that gets addressed. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Okay.
Okay, other general things that you should know about the device. It must be out in the open and in a fixed position, and especially if you have a roommate, you know, you don't want it moving around, because you don't want to, you know, it's a part of the roommate consent that they know where it is and what's going on with it. The facility must post signs at all building entrances, warning that some residents' room may have electronic monitoring. And that's not just for other residents, but it's for the general public that might be coming in and accessing. You know, we all have a right to our privacy, and we all want to know if and when we're being monitored electronically or otherwise.
So we can't use one of those teddy bears that has a camera hidden in it.
Say again?
We can't use one of those teddy bears that has the cameras
No,
hidden.
you can still
It has
use
to be
it.
out
You
in
just
the
have to make
open.
people aware that it's there.
Okay.
And then And then as far as the signage goes, there actually has to be a sign on the residence door, the door of the room where the electronic monitoring is actually happening, letting people know that electronic monitoring is being conducted in that particular room. And, the thing is, one of the things that I touched on this a little bit at the top of the presentation, that the recording can be used, for a variety of reasons. And I talked about presenting it to a facility administration when care is not going quite the way it should. But these can also be used in court, in the civil or criminal proceedings. So it's important that people know that they may be being recorded. That sounds weird, because the resulting recording can be used in court if any situation comes to that point. So, it's important to give notice to folks, the general public at large, and other residents that electronic monitoring is being conducted in a particular room.
And that is important for staff to be aware of. That's just so that they are, I think if I was an administrator, for me, I would know that my residents are getting good care, because of staff have to always be on. Yeah. And that would be very important to me as an administrator, that my residents are getting good care. And so this would be just one additional way of assuring that this was going to happen.
Absolutely. Okay. What facilities cannot do, and after having done our session so far today, I think what I'm going to add to this slide is refuse to install electronic monitoring. And I have to figure out how I'm going to word that. But anyway, they can't interfere with the electronic monitoring without resident consent. They certainly can't destroy the recording. And hopefully, if the camera system is set up right, the facility wouldn't have access to do that anyway. But just in case they do have access to it, they can't destroy the recording without resident consent. They can't access it without resident consent. So, even if there's a burning reason for them to see it, if the resident says no, they cannot see it. And of course, the facility can't retaliate or discriminate against any resident for having electronic monitoring. And we know retaliation is a big deal in our facilities. And a lot of our residents get intimidated for fear of retaliation. But hopefully, if they have the electronic monitoring, that will capture some of that retaliation, or it would at least temper the facility's urge to retaliate against a resident, not just for this, but for any other reason why a facility might retaliate against a resident. I believe we're supposed to have a link to the brochure that the state ombudsman put out.
And I can go ahead and, Stephen, if you don't have access to that, I can go ahead and put that link into the chat in a minute.
And then that will conclude my formal presentation on this matter. If anyone else has any more questions, I'll be more than happy to field them.
Well, there was a question about the slides, and I will go ahead, Lawrence, if you want to send those to me.
Okay.
What we do is whenever we have slides with any of our presentations, we do put those on the Department on Aging's website, the Ombudsman website page for the Resident and Family Support Council. I believe we can get that link in there as well. And then it's always with the description of the meeting, any PowerPoint slides or any handout that a speaker may provided to us get put in there. So I'll go ahead and make sure that happens as well, Amy, so that you can get those. And Stephen, I understand, did we have an administrator and a family member who may have joined us for this that actually has a lot of electronic monitoring going on in their facility?
I have not seen the administrator on here, and I'm not sure. I don't see the family member on here either, but and I'm having finding the brochure, finding a good link to the brochure. So
okay, I'll make sure I put that up. I'll find that for you. Has anybody used electronic monitoring themselves, or does anybody have any questions? Julie, do you have a question?
Juliet's
Yes,
here.
I think Stephen had asked me to be on here. That's why I unmuted myself and to put my picture up. So, yes, I was actually, I think it's been about a year ago. You guys did the same topic and I helped Lawrence present with the same topic last year. So I still have the camera in my dad's room, still going well. Glad I have it. It's a great advocacy tool. My dad is in memory care. He is in supportive living memory care, so he has his own individual apartment. I've used it numerous times for, you mentioned falling. He's been on the floor before where I've popped in or looked at the camera and I'm like, he went into his restroom and that was like over an hour ago. So I contacted the facility and then they were able to go in and yes, sure enough, he was still in his bathroom and he'd slipped on the floor. All of the times that he has fallen, he's never been hurt. He's like maybe slipped out of his bed or that kind of thing. And I just brought it to their attention. And then one time he did fall and I didn't see it happen. I said, well, I can go back to the camera and look because they were concerned if maybe he had fallen and hit his head and he had not. So that was good. Another thing that I think lately that has been useful is it shows me his behaviors too. He's been kind of a little bit grumpy lately. And I just was wondering if they had not been giving him Tylenol. And that actually was the case. So he's back on his Tylenol now. And I think that, because he can't say he's in pain or that kind of thing. So that's been very helpful to see those behavior changes and maybe, take note of that and talk to the director of nursing and get things going in that manner as well. I do have an Amazon Echo device as well. And so it has that drop-in feature and that's worked well too.
It sounds like, Julie, this is really, how does it make you feel having that camera in your father's room?
It's just an invaluable peace of mind for me, especially during the COVID where I was shut out and couldn't visit him. It just making sure that the expectations were being met, of care, because he doesn't have any, he needs help with all activities of daily living. And it's just gives me peace of mind knowing that he's getting the care that he needs. And for the most part, it's not been a bed of roses the whole time, but it's for the most part, things have gone very well. And the facility that he is in has had no issues. In fact, his CNA actually, when new family members come, she actually says, hey, you guys might want to think about getting a camera, especially in memory care, I believe is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling as me, if I was an administrator, falls are very, very difficult to track what happened before, to do a fall investigation for a long-term care facility. They've got to find out what happened before, what happened during, and what happened after. And if I could look at the camera and be able to root cause exactly what happened and not have to guess, it would be so helpful to keep that person safe.
Yes.
Happening.
Yes. And I have been able to record and send some videos to the executive director for training videos, like someone may come in and just drop the tray at my dad, like for whatever reason, he didn't go out to the dining room and they just brought a tray and left it and they didn't prompt him or tell him, hey, your tray's here. So I can go back and say, hey, you might want to revisit and show them, kind of what a better way would be. So we've used them as training videos before too.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's because I can see facilities could get very nervous, especially when this lawsuit thing comes into play here. And then from that, it becomes this fear of retaliation from people who live in a long-term care facility. If I put one in, are people going to avoid my mother's room because they know there's a camera in there? But if you use it as a tool for better care for everyone all around, it changes that dynamic completely.
Exactly.
It makes it an asset for everybody to be able to have that.
Right.
Yeah. And is there other people who have a camera in their room that they'd like to share too? You're getting very much compliments. Julie, they didn't consider noticing the changes in behavior. Someone has made that comment, which again, if you can't get there every day, that burden becomes very, very strong as a family member, right? And that you be able to catch things can really be really, really helpful. If anybody else would like to unmute themselves and either ask a question and or share how they've used this or what their fears in using it are. If you're a long-term care facility that has people using these cameras, please again share how that's working for you as well. That's important for everybody. Well, Stephen, can you look at us when you talk? Because I notice when you turn sideways, you're you go in and out.
Is this better? See, my screen is over here, but my microphone was over here. So, so the benefits of the camera, this is Tina. She said it helps me smooth out his clinical condition, validate things are happening or not happening, recognize the great things that are happening, and close gaps when they are needed.
Well said, Tina. I don't know, Tina, if you want to share any of your personal experiences in regards to anything that you've actually encountered and how come this makes you feel like this. If there's anything personal.
Yeah, I can jump in. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm not going to put myself on camera. I'm not camera ready today. But the benefits of the camera for me have been absolutely invaluable. My father has early stages, probably mild to moderate at this point, dementia, has COPD, diabetes, and some other things. So, as his power of attorney, and his daughter, it helps me get a clear picture on, so that I can make the best medical decisions for him, right? Are we seeing a decline because he's dehydrated, or he hasn't had a shower in 5 days, or maybe we're not checking his insulin? Oh, look, I don't see that he's eating. The other little intricacies that you may not, that other people, especially with agency staff, rotating out of long-term care these days, may not be aware of. And I feel that it helps me make the best decisions for him. There's also other times where he wears oxygen, right? And I will see on the camera that he doesn't have his oxygen on because he blew his nose or something, and it's above his shoulder, or he can't find his telephone or something like that. And I can jump in and I can see that your cannula is up above your left shoulder or something like that, or your phone is, on your left knee, or whatever it might be. And yeah, I would just echo the same things that Julie has said, even during times when I can't be there, just being able to check in and it just have a pulse on his condition, on his care. And really what I love to see is I love to catch staff doing great things, and recognize and celebrate the heck out of the work, and that there's just the personal contact that they have. I mean, this is hard work, right? And so I don't try to use the camera as a gotcha moment. I never go back and say, if there's a gap, let's just close it and move forward and use the camera as a way to make healthcare better, really.
And that's a good point, Tina raised, and I will beat myself up later on for not including that as a benefit, because I am a resident advocate and a lot of facilities are just awful. Sorry if I offend anyone by saying that. So, my focus tends to be on, the benefit to the resident for getting this. But that is a great point, Tina. It also gives you an opportunity to recognize when the facilities are doing things right and are providing great care to your loved ones, and you can point that out and celebrate it. And I think that would help. I think it'll go a long way even in improving the care, because the staff recognizes that that you recognize the care they're giving and are willing to acknowledge it, it might motivate them a little bit more to keep providing good care, even better care. So
Yeah, sure.
I will apologize for leaving that piece of it out, but I blame it on my nature of being a resident advocate.
And I would encourage, just as Julie was saying, it can become a learning opportunity. They can use it for training videos for their staff when things are not happening exactly how they should, to do the same in regards to this is how it should look. This is what it looks like when it's done well, real life situation, and this is what it looks like when it's not. So let's identify what looked good and what didn't look good and make sure that it always looks good. I think that that's another great way for facilities to be able to use this asset that they're being presented with to show it's not just a fake video that they're showing. They can show real live nurses aide that works in their facility doing something good. And I think that that can really, really be helpful for facilities to see. I did want to ask a question about the internet stuff, though. I know that most facilities do have internet, but not all. Especially more in the rural areas. How do we get around that if I want to do electronic monitoring? Because you got to have internet for all of this, correct? So how do you do this?
Well, if your facility doesn't have Wi-Fi, and like I said, I've heard of, I'm not in a rural area, but I've heard of a lot of the rural facilities don't. It's on you, the resident and or representative, to have some kind of personal hotspot in the room where they can get that device online so they can monitor what's going on. And the thing is, the act doesn't require the facility to provide you with Wi-Fi, even if they have it. I mean, it's they probably will if they do have it, because it's been my experience that if at least maybe it's just me, if I go to a facility, I always ask, what's your Wi-Fi code, and they give it to me freely. So I can't imagine they wouldn't do that for a resident as well.
Well,
Go ahead, Stephen.
So I am in some rural areas where you can't get a hotspot, won't work.
Really?
Yeah. I've got one place that just the way it is constructed, it's all concrete and steel.
Those old buildings, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really hard. They get internet in one room, and by the time you go over to the next room, that Wi-Fi signal is cut in half. So some people will install their own internet connection, and that's that's where the facility and the installation company and the resident are all going to have to work together to make sure installation happens. But worst case scenario, you don't have to have an internet connected monitoring system, electronic monitoring. You can go old school and record to, the modern ones have DVRs, digital video recording. And so it's in-house, and it's, it would be right in your loved one's room, rather than recording to the cloud, which the cloud is just, code for someone else's computer. So that is an option. It's not as secure, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to access it remotely, but it's an option.
Better than nothing.
Yeah, better than nothing. And so when you talk about those personal hotspots, like I have one for work, and it's called a MiFi, MiFi. And so it's just a teeny device that, it's probably about that big. And it's just something, similar to what Stephen's holding up.
Exactly what I've got, yeah.
And that can be used. Also, there are some phones that do have hotspots on the phone. I don't know how reliable that would be. I know it was brought up when we had our work group discussion about this, that sometimes you may, because there can be internet issues in facilities, you may just opt for doing your own MiFi, your own Wi-Fi type of situation yourself, so it doesn't get interfered with the facility Wi-Fi that can be happening, because there can be, because of that concrete issue. I do think that that's a lot of it with the life safety issues, that these buildings are built to be very strong and sturdy. So internet does not go around very easily in some of these older buildings. So know that.
Lee, we've got a couple of comments and questions, but I want to note the time, and a few people are dropping off. So before we get to more questions and comments in the chat, could you give us a plug for our next meeting?
Yes, I'm really excited about it. Our next meeting, there's this thing called Care Compare. I don't know who's aware of it, but it's the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is the federal government that oversees long-term care in all nursing homes in the entire country. They have this site called Care Compare, and it's where you can go and you can see how nursing homes across the country perform and are performing. It's like a report card kind of thing, and it's a star rating system. You may see signs of facilities that are called 5-star facilities or 4-star facilities, things like that. But it's really complicated to understand what it's all about. So we actually have invited the Quality Improvement Organization, who are the keepers of this data. They're going to come and they're going to talk to us and make it simplified for us so we can really understand what it is that we're looking at, so we can see how is the building that I'm living in performing? How is, if I'm thinking about moving to another building, is that a building I want to move to based upon how they're performing? Or if I'm thinking about going into a long-term care facility, to be able to look, to compare nursing home to nursing home. So that's going to be our next meeting on March 28th at 3 o'clock. And remember, the same link that got you here will get you to our next meeting as well. I'll go ahead and I'll put the poll up, but we will address the questions that are in the chat. And I will go ahead as well as I'll go ahead and I'll end the recording for today. And I want to thank you, Lawrence, so much for joining us and being able to do this. You're always at our meetings, but to be able to take it over today and do this, that was great. And just because we end the meeting doesn't mean that we really end.
Hey, Lee, actually, let's keep the recording on for a little bit, because just for at least the couple of questions we have.
Oh, got it. Yep. Okay. Do you want to go ahead and address those?
Yeah, so we have one comment. Cassandra, who said that
we're not hearing you again. There we go.
Being a former CNA, I have seen staff more attentive to the needs of those residents that had a camera versus those that don't. I think that's a big deal, which, you know, we want to see everybody get good care, but, you know, if you know you're being watched, you're gonna put a little more effort in.
Right.
Trish asks, can you clarify the use of cameras in skilled facilities versus if they are permitted in supportive living and assisted living facilities? I think that one goes to you, Lawrence.
I'm sorry, I missed 90% of what you said, Stephen, because your head is turned away from the microphone.
Sorry, is that better?
That's better.
All right, so with cameras, are they allowed in assisted living and skilled facilities?
They are allowed in skilled. The act specifically allows them for skilled. The act does not specifically allow them for assisted. However, I think given the nature of assisted living facilities, I think that you have the same right, if not more, to have them in assisted living facilities.
And what about supportive living? Are they allowed in there, or?
Yeah, again, I mean, my understanding of supported living, yes. And they're pretty much assisted living, but with Medicare, Medicaid. So I would think yes, that they're allowed there as well.
Yeah. In my experience, there's allowed versus required to allow.
Right.
And so for your assisted and supportive living, it's going to come back to what's in the contract. And a lot of times it'll go back to that. Whereas in skilled nursing, it is required that they allow you to have it.
I can't say I've read all the. I've never read a supportive living contract, so I'll say that. But I read a few assisted living contracts, and I don't recall ever seeing a mention of electronic monitoring in their contract. Maybe I should take a look and purposely specifically look for that language.
Yeah, I've only heard of one facility putting up barriers to a resident wanting, and it was assisted. Okay. But I haven't read their contract specifics either. And
Do
then-
we need further clarification on this, or are we fairly confident that you can have this if I'm not clear?
I'm fairly confident you can have it, but Stephen brought up a good point that I didn't think of and mention about the contract. So I think the default position on those should be referred to the contract. If the contract is silent on the issue, I would say, yes, you can have it.
Okay, so that would be how you would proceed. If there's nothing in the contract, then you can do it.
Yes.
And I think using the justification of what you talked about when you had your slides up regarding the that it is their home, that's considered their apartment.
Right.
In the supported living and or an assisted living. So if it's their apartment, they have the right to bring in anything into their house that they want to bring. And that could include, in my house, I want this camera,
Right.
which makes sense. And then there's another comment. Stephen, did you want to go ahead and take that?
The comment, I think, is in response to the one.
Can't hear you again, Stephen.
I don't know what's going on with my, it usually works better.
I think it's in response to staff being more attentive to needs of residents with cameras. And Deanna said it's kind of like when.
I'll go ahead and take it because we're still struggling hearing you. How about that, Stephen?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and share the comment. It's kind of like when state or ombudsman rep are in the long-term care, the facility itself and the staff presents and performs differently when they feel they're being monitored. I think that's so true. That speaks to what Cassandra, the CNA, has said. I personally wish that ownership of all these facilities would implement cameras, even if just in common areas, of course, with permission from the residents and the guardians. Plus, be more welcoming to cameras in rooms for those that wish. Perhaps the care would globally improve and lawsuits would decrease. I think one of the things, Stephen, that you did find that, and I believe it's the building that Julie's father lives in, is that it's taken over because Julie started doing it. Other people started doing it as well, because now they recognize that they can put a camera in their loved one's room. And so it starts to get a little, wildfire starts to happen where people are like, well, I'm going to do this too, because what a great thing that Julie can keep an eye on her dad all the time. That would really be important for me. So I want to put up a camera as well. So I think that that's one of the things that starts to happen here when you put a camera in your room.
Yeah, well, and with that particular facility, I was talking to the administrator a couple of weeks ago. They actually support people getting cameras and encourage it on admissions. So I mean, it's a facility that serves people with dementia. So more eyes on those individuals, because they can't all speak for themselves.
And that is the piece, because nursing home care is not home care. It's not one-on-one care. A nurse's aide is responsible for caring for many. It could be 15 to 20 sometimes. And if you're a nurse's aide who's responsible for caring for 20 people or 15 people or 12 people, you can't have eyes on all of them at the same time. So when you have a camera, it gives that extra reassurance that there is an eye on a resident if they're in their room at all times. And so it's that reassurance that can happen from a caregiver side, as well as from a loved one side, as well as from a residence. So I know residents have used it. They might live in a building where people might have some cognitive issues and don't know whose room is whose room. And people will go into others' rooms and take things, not necessarily because they're stealing it. They just, it's pretty, I want it. And I know facilities where residents have put cameras in the rooms for that, so that they know who took their picture of their mother that they had on their counter, or their radio that they had sitting by their bedside. Now they know who took it, and they can go back and get it from that individual and get it back in their room. So I know people who have used it in that regard as well, which is another cool way of being able to have that common purpose for being able to use these. So all in all, we've gotten really good win-win messages for doing this. We want to encourage everybody as resident advocates to pursue this. We felt it was such an important topic. We did this 2 years ago, this topic, and we're revisited again because we feel like not enough people know about this, and we want more people to be aware. So help spread the news amongst your network as well, to make people aware that they can be doing this. And we're open for any other questions. If anybody would like to unmute their mic and or put a question in. If you got a question about this or anything, we're open to any conversations or any discussion. So please feel free.
And keeping in mind, Lee, you're still recording.
Oh, I am. Okay, I'm gonna have to, thank you. I will have to end that recording a little bit because it gets too long for people. And I lost my button. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Lawrence, for telling me.